On the day they came, I stopped being human. They didn't steal my freedom that day. Freedom had vanished from Kyiv a year earlier, along with the first rumble of bombs and the appearance of foreign uniforms on our streets. No, that day, they took something far more essential. They took my humanity. The girl named Oksana, a 19-year-old student who believed in the future, died on the dusty cobblestones, pinned to the ground by a boot. In her place, a number was born, a nameless working unit, an Ostarbeiter. And the first thing I understood in my new hollow existence wasn't fear. Fear is an emotion. It implies that you're alive. No, what came first was a realization, cold as steel. The worst thing isn't when they want to kill you. Murder is still personal after all. It means you're an enemy, that you exist. The worst thing is when they don't consider you human enough to even hate. You're simply a thing. You're raw material, you're livestock. And from that icy, mundane, businesslike understanding, your blood runs colder faster than from any horror of death. You look them in the eyes, but they don't see you. They see a pair of working hands, the width of your hips, the condition of your teeth. They're conducting an inventory. Autumn, 1942. Kyiv had gone still. After the roar of airplanes and the thunder of anti-aircraft guns from the previous year, this thick, tense silence of occupation pressed on your ears like water on a drowning man. The city wasn't dead. It was hiding like a cornered animal. People walked the streets quickly, eyes down, trying not to look at the well-fed, clean faces of German patrols, or at the orders from the new commandant's office posted everywhere. Every day, someone disappeared. First it was the Jews, driven to Babi Yar, then the communists, and then they came for the rest of us. For the ordinary, for the young, for the healthy. 19-year-old Oksana knew this. War had burned away her innocence. She'd learned the primary rule of survival: be invisible. Her world, once full of lectures and plans, had shrunk to the size of their tiny apartment. Her life had become daily risky excursions to the market, trading mother's last shawl for a few potatoes. That day she went to the bazaar. Mother had taken to bed with fever. She was already on her way back, pressing to her chest a tiny but priceless bundle with frozen beets. She was almost home. She was already thinking about making hot soup. And in that moment, the street died. Suddenly, from both ends, it was blocked by covered German trucks. From them, like peas, soldiers in gray uniforms poured out. And what was even more terrifying, local police collaborators with white armbands on their sleeves. They moved in a chain. They weren't arresting, they were herding. This wasn't an arrest. This was a roundup. This was livestock being driven. They grabbed without discrimination anyone who looked young and healthy. Screams, women's shrieks, crying, guttural German cursing. An old market woman clung to her young granddaughter and was thrown back by a powerful rifle butt. Strike. Some guy in a cap tried to dart into a gateway. A short crack rang out, casual as the snap of a whip. The guy fell. Oksana froze. She was trapped. There was nowhere to run. One of our own approached her, a hefty police collaborator with a pock-marked, bloated face. He didn't look her in the eyes. His gaze slid over her figure, appraising, dirty. "Come on, beauty, you're coming with us," he smirked. And in that smirk was everything. He spoke her language. He might have lived on her very street. And he was savoring his power. He unceremoniously grabbed her arm. His fingers dug into her forearm. "You'll work for the good of the new Europe." "Let go!" Oksana screamed, trying to break free. "My mother is sick, I can't." Her scream drowned in the general din. The policeman paid no attention. He simply dragged her, like a sack, like a thing, toward the truck bed, where other girls were already struggling and crying. "Quickly, get in!" he barked, shoving her toward the side. And in that moment, in desperation, she turned around. She saw her younger brother running across the street, stumbling. 12-year-old Misha, he saw her. "Oksana, stop!" "Where?" he shouted, trying to break through the German chain. A German soldier, a young guy who was clearly bored, lazily, without aiming, jabbed him in the chest with his rifle butt. The boy collapsed on the cobblestones. Something inside Oksana broke. All her grayness, all her invisibility, her entire survival strategy burned up in 1 second. With inhuman strength she didn't know she possessed, she tore her hand from the policeman's grip, spun around, and with a death grip, sank her teeth into his hand. The policeman howled in pain and surprise. He flung her away from himself so hard that she fell to the ground, hitting her head painfully on the pavement. The bundle with beets burst open, and the frozen root vegetables rolled through the dirt. He raised his heavy boot to kick her in the face. "Halt! Stop!" came a sharp, authoritative shout. A German officer approached them, neat, in a perfectly clean uniform, in a peaked cap. He looked with disgust at the policeman who was shaking his bitten hand like a fool. Then he turned his gaze to Oksana. She lay on the ground, disheveled, dirty. She looked up at him, and in her eyes there was no fear, no tears. There was only pure, concentrated, incinerating hatred. The officer froze for a moment, and then a crooked, appraising smile touched his lips. "Das ist gut, starker Wille, this is good." "Strong will," he said in broken Russian, addressing the policeman. He didn't look at her as a woman. He looked at her the way a farmer looks at a spirited but thoroughbred mare. "Solche brauchen wir, we need ones like this. Load her up." He turned and walked away without dirtying his boots. His mission was complete. He had selected quality material. 2 German soldiers roughly lifted Oksana from the ground. Her arms were twisted behind her back. She no longer resisted. She was empty. They dragged her to the truck, and she looked at only one thing. At her brother, who still lay on the pavement, and at the frozen beets that boots were already trampling. They threw her into the truck bed like firewood. The truck started moving. Kyiv, golden domes, hungry streets, and the sick mother left in an empty apartment. All of it disappeared behind the canvas tarp. She lay on the dirty floor among dozens of crying, frightened, broken girls. She didn't cry. She stared at the gray sky visible through a crack. In her soul, on the burned-to-ash ruins of her childhood, a new cold flame was igniting. A flame that would either burn her to nothing or help her survive. That truck was just the preface. The real conveyor belt of dehumanization awaited us in Darnitsa. This wasn't a camp, it was a sorting pen. A huge field, surrounded by barbed wire divided into sectors. Thousands of people rushing about in muddy slush merged into one solid humming wail of despair. Here the screams of individual people drowned in the general roar of human livestock awaiting shipment. They drove us out of the trucks with kicks and rifle butts. Here I lost sight of those I'd ridden with. The crowd swallowed them. They shoved me into a new, unfamiliar line that led to a long wooden barracks. The first procedure. They herded us inside. Order, strip naked. We still tried to cover ourselves, turn away. We still remembered what shame was. First was the bath. Not a bath, but disinfection. They doused us with hoses of ice-cold, stinking water, and then, without letting us dry, forced us to pass through a vat of caustic, murky liquid. It burned skin, lungs, eyes. This wasn't cleansing, this was poisoning. They were poisoning the lice in us. They were poisoning the scabies in us, but mainly, they were poisoning the remnants of human dignity in us. And then began what was more terrible, what I will never be able to forget. They drove us, naked, trembling, wet, one by one into another room. This was a medical examination. The room was clean, brightly lit. In it stood doctors in white coats. Not soldiers, not police. Doctors. People who had taken the Hippocratic oath. They didn't look us in the eyes. They looked at their clipboards. This wasn't a medical examination. This was branding of goods. They roughly shoved me onto a gynecological chair. The cold metal seared my skin. The doctor, elderly, gray-haired with glasses, approached me. He didn't say a word. He acted quickly, roughly, professionally. Not as a rapist. Worse, as a veterinarian inspecting a cow. He examined me from the inside and noted something. They were looking not for diseases, they were looking for virgins. I saw how the girl before me, very young, about 16, he examined and threw something short to his assistant. He made a mark on her card, and then, when she climbed down from the chair, a white ribbon was tied on her wrist. I understood. This was a market, a slave market, organized with impeccable scientific pedantry. Jungfrau virgins. They were valued more highly in the slave market. They were sent to other places, to officers' houses, to brothels for soldiers as clean material for special programs. Another fate, possibly even more terrible, awaited them. When the doctor touched me with his cold instruments, I didn't feel pain. I felt only icy, paralyzing terror. I wasn't praying for salvation. I was praying for this examination to end, for him not to find this value in me. 9, he threw to his assistant. No, he didn't find it. And in that moment, to my shame, I felt relief. I wouldn't be marked with a white ribbon. I was defective goods, second-grade merchandise, and this meant I would go not to a brothel, but to a factory or farm. This was my first lesson in survival in this world. The less you're worth, the better your chances. After this humiliation, after this branding, they gave us clothes. Rough, prickly canvas dresses, and the last thing that took away our names, a blue rectangular patch with 3 white letters, O-S-T Ostarbeiter. This was our new caste, our new surname, the mark that separated us from people. And then came the train cars. I thought the truck that had carried me through Kyiv was overcrowded. I was wrong. They drove us to a train. And these weren't passenger cars. These were freight wagons, cattle cars. The doors opened, and they began packing us inside. Schnell! Schnell! Shouts, blows with rifle butts. People were stuffed in until it seemed the walls would crack. Into our car, designed for 8 horses, they crammed 150 people. There was no possibility of sitting, no possibility of moving. We stood, compressed into a single swaying, moaning mass. The door slammed shut with a crash, cutting off the last gulp of light and air. The train started moving. The nightmare began almost immediately. There was nothing to breathe. The air turned into a thick, hot, fetid mixture of sweat, fear, and ammonia. Below us was dirty straw. People began to suffocate. Those who were weaker, the elderly and children, lost consciousness. They didn't fall. They simply sank down under the feet of the rest and were trampled, not from malice, simply because there was no room not to step. I found myself wedged between some bony woman and a very young girl with huge, frightened eyes. The girl was crying, not hysterically. She was quietly, hopelessly wailing, like a puppy. "Don't cry," I croaked, barely breathing myself. "Save your strength. We must save our strength. Water. I want water," she mumbled. Everyone wanted water. The thirst was excruciating. It drove you mad. Lips cracked, tongue stuck to the palate. After a day, or maybe 2, time disappeared. The train stopped. They opened the door a narrow crack. Soldiers threw inside several loaves of black bread, black as peat. They fell right in the center of the car. What they were probably hoping for began. A crush. People, maddened by hunger, turned into animals. They rushed toward this bread, pushing, trampling, biting each other. I saw a man with mad eyes tear a piece from a child, and immediately, choking, began stuffing it into his mouth. I didn't climb into this melee. I pressed the crying girl to me, trying to protect her from this crazed crowd. When the crush subsided, I saw that the bony woman next to me, the one who had been maliciously silent, was holding in her hand a tiny, miraculously obtained piece of bread clenched in her fist. She looked at it with hungry, wolfish eyes, then at me, then at the crying girl. Her face, mean and emaciated, trembled for a moment. She broke this tiny piece, the size of a walnut, into 3 parts. One she held out to me, the other to the girl. "Take it," she croaked. "Together maybe we'll survive. Alone we'll definitely die." This was my second lesson, bitter as that bread, but the only true one. On the third day in the car, people began to die. First, an elderly woman in the corner died. Then a man who'd been wheezing the whole way. Their bodies remained standing with us, because there was nowhere for them to fall. The living stood embracing the dead, and this was perhaps the most terrible thing of all. The boundary between life and death was erased. I nearly lost consciousness. I was falling into a sticky, feverish oblivion. I dreamed of Mother holding out to me a cup of cold well water. I reached for this cup, but couldn't reach it. The girl next to me no longer cried. She was quietly delirious, calling for Mama. I hugged her, stroked her tangled hair, and whispered, "Hush, little one, hush. Everything will be fine." I was lying. I knew I was lying, but this lie was the only thing we had left. When the train finally stopped and the doors slid apart with a crash, not everyone could get out. About 20 people in our car remained lying on the dirty straw, dead. They didn't make it. I, staggering, climbed out onto the platform. I breathed in deeply. This was the cold, damp, foreign air of Germany. I had survived, and next to me, leaning on my shoulder, stood that same girl. She had survived too. On the platform, they were already waiting for us. New shouts, new commands, new rows of barbed wire. Our hell hadn't ended. It had simply changed scenery, muscles cramped from convulsions. In my mouth was the taste of copper and despair. Us, the survivors, they drove out of the stinking cars onto a clean, neat, stone-paved German platform. They didn't beat us with rifle butts. They blinded us with searchlights and drove us forward with even measured commands. There was no chaos of a roundup here. Here was the icy, methodical order of a conveyor belt. The first stop was disinfection, a barracks that reeked of carbolic acid and something else. Acrid, chemical. Alle ausziehen, schnell, everyone undress quickly. We, hundreds of women, once again found ourselves in one bare, humiliated space. But this wasn't like in Kyiv. There was fear there. Here was emptiness. Shame had already atrophied. We were broken. They drove us under streams of ice-cold water that took your breath away, and then under a shower of whitish, stinking liquid. This was some powder that was supposed to kill the lice. It killed the skin, too. It burned, blistered. They poisoned us like insects before even determining our value. They needed clean, sterile slaves. But the most terrible thing wasn't this. The most terrible thing was what happened after. After the humiliation by water and chemicals came humiliation by touch. They drove us, naked, trembling, with burning skin, into a long, brightly lit room. This wasn't an infirmary. This was a veterinary station. Along the wall stood tables. Behind them sat people in white coats. And what was even more terrible, people in civilian clothes. Men. They drank coffee and smoked, lazily shuffling papers. They were the buyers, and we were the merchandise. Women in rough gray robes approached us. Not doctors, rather guards. They did the same thing as the doctor in Kyiv, but even more roughly. This wasn't a check for virginity. That selection had already passed. This was sorting by quality. Hände, hands. You extend your palms. They look at the calluses. Mund off, mouth open. They look into your mouth, like a horse, checking teeth, assessing whether you can chew their slop. And here the market divided. I saw how some girls, those who were prettier, whose skin was cleaner, who even after the train car and chemicals had retained remnants of attractiveness, were approached separately. Not a doctor approached them, but a man in an elegant suit. He didn't look at their hands. He looked at their faces, at their breasts, at their hips. He noted something in his notebook. These girls received a different mark. They were led to a separate barracks. We, the second grade, envied them. We thought easy work awaited them. Work in the house, work in the kitchen, we were fools. We didn't know that the most terrible work of all awaited them. We didn't know they were being sent to Wehrmacht brothels, to soldiers' brothels, where the term of service was even shorter than at any factory. I was thin, exhausted, with eyes dead from fury. The man in the suit passed by me without a glance. I again felt that burning, shameful relief of defective goods. My ugliness was my armor. But then began the second phase of selection. Selection no longer for sex, but for labor. They lined us up in a huge cold hangar. Before us, behind long tables, sat buyers, representatives of German industrial concerns, agricultural enterprises, and government services. They didn't shout or bargain. They silently studied lists. This was an exchange, a labor exchange, organized with impeccable German pedantry. A specialist approached the line, something between a doctor and a veterinarian. He acted quickly. He didn't look at faces. He felt muscles. He made you clench your fist, checking the strength of your fingers. He looked at your back, at your legs, and he delivered a verdict, writing in a card one letter. K, craft, strong, suitable for heavy labor. M, mittel, average, for auxiliary work. S, schwach, weak, practically defective. I stood in the line, watching this with cold, detached fury. I saw how the girl next to me, that same Anya whom I had protected in the train car, was marked with the letter S. Anya was fragile and weak by nature, and the journey had completely broken her. The buyers didn't even look at her. She was a liquid goods. Finally, my turn came. The specialist routinely examined my hands, teeth. I was thin, but in my eyes, as that officer in Kyiv had said, was strong will. He glanced at my card, where apparently there was a note about my rebellion. He chuckled. He felt my shoulders, my calves. Stark, he said. Strong. And with a thick stroke wrote on my card the letter K, the highest category. And then a man came to us, to the group of Ks. He wasn't like the others. He wore neither military uniform nor the expensive suit of an industrialist. He was dressed simply, thick woolen jacket, boots. He looked about 50. He had a red, weathered face and very light, almost colorless, attentive eyes. This was a Bauer, a farmer. He didn't study us wholesale. He walked along our line and looked at each one. He looked at me the same way as that officer in Kyiv. He wasn't assessing my labor power. He was assessing me, my anger, my youth. He stopped in front of me. He was tall. He smelled of earth and tobacco. He didn't command. He simply raised his hand and pointed his finger at me. Dies, this one, he said. The clerk at the table checked something in the papers. She's category K. She's suitable for heavy work. Are you sure, Herr Müller? I'm sure, said the farmer, not taking his light eyes off me. I'll take her and that medium one over there. He paid. He signed papers. From this second, I ceased to be state property. I became his private property. I, Oksana, 19-year-old student, was bought like a cow at a fair. They separated the K and M categories from the rest. They shoved me into the group that Herr Müller was taking, and in this moment I saw Anya for the last time. She stood in the group of the weak. They, as I learned later, were sent to the dirtiest work in the camp itself or to war factories, where they were supposed to die from hunger and unbearable labor, as unnecessary ballast. Our eyes met for a second. In Anya's gaze was gratitude and mortal animal terror. In Oksana's gaze, helpless, icy fury. I couldn't protect her again. They separated us. They led her left to trains going to the Ruhr, to the smoky centers of war industry, and they led me right to a small, dirty truck that was supposed to take me to Bavaria, to a farm. Then, in that moment, I thought I was lucky. I thought a farm was fresh air, was food. It was better than dying from chemicals at a factory, like Anya. I was so naive. I didn't yet know that at a factory you're a faceless number, one of thousands. The system kills you, but on a farm you're alone. You're in the master's palm. And he's not a system. He's a person. and he has his own personal special needs. I didn't yet know that at a factory they kill the body, but on the farm where I would end up, they would take my soul from me every day, every night. They shoved us, 5 girls and 2 guys, into the bed of this truck. Herr Müller, my new master, didn't sit in the cab. He sat in the bed with us. He took out a pipe and lit it, silently examining his new property through clouds of smoke. The road was long. We drove south deep into Germany. Thoughts tangled. I should have been happy. I wasn't in a brothel. I wasn't at a factory. But the cold, appraising gaze of Herr Müller, which looked at me without stopping all these hours, promised nothing but a new, even more personal and disgusting nightmare. The truck stopped late at night. Around there were no factories, no lights, only ringing silence, the smell of hay and manure. "Raus! Out!" croaked Herr Müller, opening the tailgate. We jumped to the ground. Before us was a large, dark farmhouse. It looked peaceful, but in this silence and darkness, my new prison was already hiding. They drove us out of the truck, 5 girls and 2 guys. We stood, huddled on the dirty yard. It was quiet, too quiet. This silence was deafening after the hell of the train car and the shouts of the sorting camp. It smelled of hay, manure, and sour milk. This was the smell of a world that no longer belonged to us. A woman came out of the house, tall, bony, with a tightly pulled bun of gray hair. This was Frau Müller. She didn't look at us, she looked at her husband. In her gaze there was no joy at his return. In it was cold business calculation. "You brought them?" she asked in German. "I brought them," he answered, nodding at us. 7 heads, all categories K and M strong. 7 mouths, she hissed, and her gaze, sharp as a knife, passed over us. It stopped on me, longer than on the others. In that second, I understood that my real hell hadn't yet begun. She saw in me not a worker. She saw in me a threat. She saw that I was young. They didn't lead us to the house. They led us to the barn, to that part of it where, apparently, they used to keep pigs. In the corner was piled straw, dirty, matted. In the wall, one small window covered in cobwebs, the door closed with a heavy bolt. "This is your room," said Frau Müller through the crack. "At 5 in the morning, rise. Whoever oversleeps will go without food." They brought food an hour later. It was a bucket of warm, tasteless slop, boiled rutabaga, but it was hot food. We ate with our hands, burning ourselves, choking, growling like animals. We had survived, we had arrived, we were in place. That night I didn't sleep. I lay on the straw and listened to the silence. It was more terrible than screams. I was in a trap, not in a camp surrounded by thousands like me, but in a personal, solitary cell where there were only 2 guards. And I already knew which of them was more terrible. Work began before dawn. They woke us not with shouts, but with blows of a stick on the door. Frau Müller, she assigned us work. Clean the stalls, haul water, feed the pigs. The work was endless, 16 hours a day. Hands, unaccustomed to labor, instantly covered with blisters that burst, turning into bloody wounds. We fell from exhaustion, but Frau Müller was always nearby. She didn't beat us hard, she beat us humiliatingly, a light but painful blow of the whip on the legs. Schneller, ukrainische Schweine, faster, Ukrainian pigs. Food was our only compass in time. In the morning, a cup of hot water with a cracker. At lunch, a bowl of that same slop from rutabaga. In the evening, if you were lucky, a boiled potato. We starved. We were in constant animal, maddening hunger. Herr Müller, the master, hardly appeared. He worked in the field. He was a shadow, watching from afar. I felt his touch differently. I felt his gaze when I, bent in 3 weeded beets. I felt his gaze on my back. When I dragged buckets of water, I saw how he stood at the window and looked at me. He didn't look at the others. He looked at me. And Frau Müller saw this too. and her hatred for me grew with each day. She found a way to make my life unbearable. She began to nitpick. The floor wasn't washed clean enough. Water was brought too slowly. She deprived me of food. First lunch, then dinner. If this lazy pig doesn't want to work, she won't eat, she told her husband, who silently smoked his pipe. I began to weaken. Hunger is a terrible thing. It displaces pride. It displaces fury. It leaves only one thing, instinct. And then he made his first move. I was working in the barn, sorting rotten potatoes. The door creaked. He entered. Herr Müller. I froze. He didn't say a word. He simply approached and held out to me a piece of bread. Not a cracker, real soft rye bread and a small piece of lard. I looked at this bread and I was salivating. I couldn't think. I was simply a hungry beast. Eat, he said, quietly, almost tenderly. My hands shook. I grabbed this bread. I stuffed it into my mouth, choking, swallowing, chewing. This was bliss. This was disgusting. I knew it wasn't free. I knew this was the first installment. He watched how I ate, and in his light, colorless eyes there was no lust. No, there was something worse. Satisfaction. The satisfaction of a master who tames a wild animal. He didn't say another word. He simply left. The next day, Frau Müller was like a fury. She knew. She couldn't not know. She beat me not with a whip, with fists. She knocked me to the ground and kicked me, shouting that I was a Russian whore, that I was trying to steal her husband, that she would grind me to powder. I lay, curled up, and was silent. I didn't cry. I understood the rules of this game. This was their war, and I was the battlefield. I found myself in an unbearable trap. If I refused the master's gifts, I died from hunger and beatings from his wife. If I accepted them, I also died, but differently. The master began giving me light work. He took me from under his wife's supervision and led me to the far barn to sort seeds or mend sacks. And there he talked. This was more terrible than beatings. He sat opposite and told me about his harvest, about his cows, about how war is bad, but order is good. And he looked at me. He waited. He waited for me to break, for me to begin to smile, for me to look at him with gratitude, and then he began to touch me. At first it was accidental. He passed by and brushed my shoulder. Then he began helping me lift a sack, and his hand accidentally touched mine, and then he cornered me. This was in the barn. It smelled of dust and dry grass. He simply approached and pressed me against the wall. He wasn't rough. He was heavy, like a sack of grain. Du bist schön, he whispered, breathing garlic and tobacco in my face. You're beautiful. You'll be a good girl. I'll feed you well. You won't have to work in the field anymore. You'll help me here. He reached his hand toward my breast, and in this moment, the fury, that same fury from Kyiv, which I thought had died from hunger, returned. It exploded me from within. I didn't know what I was doing. I struck him not with my hand, with my head. With all my force, like a ram, I struck him in the face. There was a crunch. He howled like a bull and recoiled, clutching his smashed nose. Blood gushed between his fingers. He looked at me, and in his eyes there was no longer the good master. In his eyes was pure, icy, Teutonic fury. He was an owner whose thing dared to bite him. He didn't hit me back. He silently wiped the blood with his sleeve. Good, he said. Good. You made your choice, Ukrainische Hure, Ukrainian whore. He left and locked the barn door from outside with a bolt. I remained alone in the darkness, in the silence. I knew he would return, but he would return no longer with bread. He would return for what, as he believed, belonged to him by right, and he would take it by force. I remained alone in the absolute ringing darkness of the barn. He locked me on a bolt. I heard how his heavy boots moved away across the yard, and how he furiously shouted something to his wife. I was trapped. I pressed against the wall, trying to catch my breath, I felt on my lips the taste of his blood, and I didn't feel fear. I felt triumph. I, a thing, fought back. I, a whore, made the master wash in blood. This surge of pride was short. It was replaced by icy, sticky terror. I knew he would return. I knew that for this head strike, for this blood, he wouldn't simply punish me. He would destroy me. I sat in the darkness, smelling of dust and dry grass, and waited. An hour passed. 2. I heard a dog barking in the yard. I heard Frau Müller shouting at the other girls, driving them into the barn. I heard the farm go quiet. And in this silence, I waited for his steps. The steps sounded closer to midnight. The heavy bolt slid aside. The door opened with a creak. I huddled in the farthest corner, like an animal seeking a burrow. On the threshold stood him, Herr Müller. His face was swollen. The nose was broken and bent to the side. He looked at me, and in his light, colorless eyes there was nothing but cold, dead emptiness. He wasn't angry, he was methodical, and then he stepped aside, and I saw that he wasn't alone. Behind him stood two. These were Ivan and Petro, two Ukrainian guys who had been brought with me, the same raw material as me. They stood, heads down, and didn't look at me. "Do you know what this Ukrainian dog did?" said Müller, addressing them. His voice was calm. "She attacked me, her master, the person who gives you bread." The guys were silent. "She's bad material," Müller continued, as if reading a lecture. "She must learn order, Ordnung, and you will help me with this." He stepped toward Ivan, the tallest and strongest of them, and held out to him a whole loaf of bread and a piece of lard. "You, Ivan," he said, "you'll be first. You'll show her what a real master is, and then you, Petro. And after that you'll receive this and a double portion of slop. And maybe I'll transfer you to light work in the house." I looked at them, and I couldn't breathe. I understood his diabolical plan. He didn't want to dirty his hands. He didn't just want to rape me. He wanted me to be trampled by my own, for a slave to break a slave, for hunger to defeat humanity. This was his main triumph, not simply to break me, but to prove that we aren't people, that for a piece of bread we're ready for anything. Ivan, a 20-year-old guy who, I knew, had left a fiancée at home, looked at this bread. He looked at it like at the sun. He hadn't eaten normal food for 3 months. He was a shadow. "What are you standing for, Ivan?" Müller smirked. "This is good bread. Or do you want back to your barracks, and in the morning to the punishment cell without food for a week?" Ivan raised his eyes. He looked at me. In his eyes there was no malice, no lust. In his eyes was something more terrible. In his eyes was hunger and despair. "Forgive me," he whispered. Not to me, to the sky. "No!" shouted Petro, the younger one. "Don't! We're people!" Müller, without turning, kicked Petro in the stomach. He doubled over, gasping. "People are here. It's me," hissed Müller, "and your cattle. And you, Ivan, will now prove to me that you're useful cattle, or you'll die with him in the punishment cell." He threw the bread on the straw right between me and Ivan. "Take it," he commanded. "Like dogs. Ivan." Ivan stepped. He stepped not toward me. He stepped toward the bread. He fell to his knees and grabbed it. He sank his teeth into it, and Müller watched. He let him bite off, and then kicked him with his boot. Zuerst die Arbeit, dann das Vergnügen, first work, then pleasure. Ivan raised his head. His face was smeared with crumbs and tears. He looked at me, and in his eyes there was no longer a person. There was only the command and hunger. "Forgive me, sister," he croaked, getting up and moving toward me. I stopped screaming. I stopped fighting. I simply closed my eyes. I left. I wasn't in this barn. I was in Kyiv. I was in the library. I felt the smell of old books. I saw how my younger brother Misha ate an apple. I saw how Mama smiled. I heard how the pen creaked when I wrote notes. I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel anything. I shut down. The girl named Oksana, who struck the master with her head, who believed in fury, who bit into the policeman with her teeth. She died that night in the dusty barn on dirty straw. When I opened my eyes, it was morning. Cold, gray light beat through a crack in the wall. In the barn, there was no one except me, and the loaf of bread that still lay on the straw, uneaten. I lay and couldn't move, not because I was held, but because there was no point. Everything was over. The door opened with a creak. She entered, Frau Müller. She didn't look at me. She looked at the bread. She approached, squeamishly kicked it with her foot. "So," she said, with cold, almost cheerful satisfaction. "I see your appetite has disappeared. Nothing. Now you know your place." She looked at me, at what I had become, and in her eyes there wasn't a drop of female solidarity. In them was triumph, the triumph of a humiliated woman who with pleasure looks at one who has been humiliated even more. "Now you're just a used thing," she hissed. "Now you're not dangerous. Get up, Ukrainische Hündin. The pigs aren't fed." I got up. I don't know how. I got up. The body was foreign. It hurt, but this wasn't my pain. I was an automaton. I left the barn. I went to the well. I took the buckets. I went to feed the pigs. I did everything she said. I didn't look at her. I didn't look at him. I didn't look at Ivan, who stood in the corner of the yard and was vomiting bile. I was the ideal slave. Empty, ideal, broken. The master no longer flirted with me. He didn't need to. He simply came, sometimes to that same barn, sometimes right to our barn where the other girls slept, who pretended not to hear. He came, and he took without malice, without passion. As a farmer takes a thing that belongs to him, he took what he paid for. And I left. I left to Kyiv, to the library, to Mama. A week passed, 2. I was a living corpse. I worked on autopilot, ate on autopilot, existed on autopilot, and then something changed. At first I didn't understand. I began to feel nauseous in the mornings, not from hunger, but from food. That slop from rutabaga, which before had been my only dream, now caused a gag reflex. At first I thought it was poisoning or illness, but then, when I was once again cleaning the cow barn, I understood. I understood, because my own smell changed. I understood, because my body, my faithful, tormented body, it betrayed me one last time. I was pregnant. I was pregnant. This realization didn't come immediately. It grew in me like a weed, slowly but inexorably. First was nausea. I thought it was from hunger, from the eternal nauseating rutabaga, then dizziness. I thought it was from exhaustion, from the 16-hour workday, from Frau Müller's beatings. But my body, my tormented, betrayed body, was telling the truth. It was changing smell. It was changing shape. I was pregnant. And this wasn't the miracle of new life. This was the apotheosis of my slavery. Inside me wasn't growing a child. Inside me was growing. He was growing his blood, his semen, his violence. This was his air. This was a parasite feeding on my last surviving part. I, Oksana, 19-year-old student, had turned into an incubator for my executioner. This was the last, most terrible joke of the devil. I tried to hide it. I bound my stomach with rags. I tried to eat less so I wouldn't grow. I prayed. Not to God. No. I prayed that he would die, that he simply wouldn't be born. I fell to my knees in the dark barn, not from prayer. I beat my stomach with my fists, again and again. I tried to kill him before he killed me. But he was strong. He was as strong and stubborn as his father. He clung to life, and then she noticed. Frau Müller. She noticed not from my stomach. She noticed from him, from her husband. Herr Müller stopped coming to me in the barn. He stopped touching me altogether. He began protecting me. One day, when I was slowly dragging a sack of potatoes, I could no longer run like before. Frau Müller approached as usual to hit me with the whip. Nicht! Don't you dare! His voice rang out. He stood at the gate. Leave her. She can't carry heavy things. Frau Müller froze. Her hand with the whip remained in the air. She slowly turned to him, and then she turned to me. She looked at me, at my stomach, which could no longer be hidden under the torn dress. And in her eyes I saw not just hatred. I saw what I'd seen in the policeman's eyes in Kyiv. I saw triumph, but different. The triumph of a humiliated woman who had finally understood why she'd been humiliated. She said nothing. She lowered the whip and smiled. This was the most terrible smile I'd seen in my life. And from that day, my life turned into a hell compared to which Ivan's barn had been merely purgatory. She no longer beat me. She began taking care of me in her own way. You're carrying his child? She hissed at me that same evening when she caught me in the barn. You, Ukrainian swine, you're carrying Herr Müller's heir. Fine. We'll see how you carry him out. She began giving me the hardest work. Not the dirtiest, the hardest. She made me crawl on all fours across the icy yard and clean manure from under the hooves with my hands. She made me haul buckets of water from the well, not running, but walking slowly, so I'd feel the weight longer. You're strong, she hissed, following me. You're K category. You must give birth to a healthy, strong slave. Work, work, whore. I fell, and she made me get up. Carrying his spawn, then carry it. And he watched. He watched from the house window, and he did nothing. He, the master, who could stop her with one word, simply watched as his wife slowly killed me and his heir. This was their war, the war of two Germans for the right to own this farm. And I was simply the battlefield. I was the weapon with which they struck each other blows. I hated her, but him I hated 1,000 times more. But I survived, and he inside me survived too. My body, despite hunger, beatings, and icy water, performed its terrible animal function. I grew. When I was in my 7th month, what had to happen happened. Frau Müller, in a fit of rage when I refused to climb into the icy cellar for sauerkraut, pushed me. I fell down the stairs. I tumbled down those dirty steps, hitting my stomach on the wood. I screamed for the first time in all this time. I didn't scream from pain. I screamed in terror that now I would lose him. And I realized that I, Oksana, hating this child, I didn't want him to die. Not like this, not by her will. I lay below in the darkness, and blood flowed from me. I thought it was the end. She came down for me. She looked at me at the blood, and she laughed with quiet, happy laughter. Finally, she whispered. Dead. Thank God, dead. She left and locked me in the cellar. I lay there in the icy darkness, in a pool of my own blood, for almost a full day. I was delirious. I called for Mother. I called for Misha. I called for Anya from the train car, and then I heard a sound. Not footsteps, not screams. I heard a rumble, a distant rolling rumble that shook the earth, that made the jars of preserves on the shelves tremble. This wasn't thunder. This was artillery. The front. It was close. And this sound, the sound of hope for millions, became the final blow for me. I understood they wouldn't let me survive. They would kill me as a witness. But this sound, it pulled me out. Fury. The same fury that had saved me in Kyiv. I won't die here. Not in a cellar, not by her will. I don't know how I got out. I broke through a rotten board in the door with my shoulder. I crawled out. I looked like a beast, dirty, bloody, in rags. I crawled into the yard and saw them. Herr Müller and Frau Müller. They weren't arguing. They were feverishly loading sacks of flour, smoked meat, some boxes onto a cart. They were preparing to flee. The rumble was very close now. They saw me. Frau Müller recoiled as if from a ghost. You're alive? And he, Herr Müller, He looked at me and his face twisted, not from fear of the Russians, from anger. You, he croaked. You killed him. You killed mine. He didn't finish. From beyond the forest, 2 tanks with red stars emerged. This was the end. An explosion. I don't know what it was. A shell, a mine, but it was close. The blast wave threw me back against the barn. I hit my head, and everything went dark. When I came to, it was quiet. There was no cannonade, no screams. It smelled of smoke and pain, terrible tearing pain in my lower abdomen. I lay on straw in that very barn where we pigs had slept. And I understood. I understood what this pain was. He hadn't died in the cellar. He was being born right now. Here, I was alone, in hell. War was raging around, and I was giving birth. I won't tell you about it. It can't be told. It was animal, bloody, primordial horror. I screamed. I bit the straw. I lost consciousness and came to from a new wave of pain. And in that moment when I thought I was dying, when I was ready to die, I heard him, a thin, piercing cry full of rage. I had given birth. I lay there exhausted in blood and dirt. And I looked at him. It was a boy. Small, red, screaming, and he was blonde, with blue eyes like Herr Müller's. I looked at him, and I felt nothing. Not hatred, not love, only emptiness. This wasn't my child. This was their child. The barn door opened. On the threshold stood them. Herr Müller and Frau Müller. They hadn't been killed. They were dirty, frightened. Behind them stood 2 Soviet soldiers with automatic rifles. Here's another one, a soldier said. Mother of God. He saw me. He saw the blood. He saw him. Is this yours? He asked Müller, poking him with his rifle. Müller was silent, and Frau Müller, she looked at this child, at this blonde, blue-eyed boy, at the air, and I did what I had to do. Gathering my last strength, I sat up. I took this screaming, wet bundle. I looked into Frau Müller's eyes. I held him out to her. Ja, das ist deins. This is yours, I croaked. You wanted it. You protected it. Take him. She recoiled. No, she whispered. Take him, I said. This is your heir. You won. And I gave her this child. And then I looked at the soldier. I'm Oksana from Kyiv, number OST 817. I remember everything. They carried me out of that barn in their arms. I don't know what happened to them. To Müller, to his wife, to him. I didn't care. I left them at the exit. I left them their inheritance. I returned to Kyiv. I went through Smersh camps. They interrogated me. They didn't believe. Why did you survive? Why didn't you die? They didn't believe one could survive without being a traitor. But I survived. I returned to my city. My mother was dead. My brother was in an orphanage. My home was burned. I had nothing left, except memory. I am Oksana. I am number OST. I was a thing, an incubator, a slave. I was broken. I was raped. I gave birth to a monster. But I survived. I lived to see this day. I sit here, and I tell you, they wanted me to be nameless material. They wanted me to disappear. But I am here, and I remember. And as long as I remember, I haven't lost. My memory is my victory. Oksana was one of 5, 7 million Soviet citizens abducted by Nazi Germany for forced labor, known as Ostarbeiter, Eastern workers. This was not conventional military warfare. This was a war against humanity itself. Historical facts. From 1941 to 1945, The Nazis established a system of racial classification. Slavic people were ranked at the bottom, not as prisoners of war, but as living material. They were marked with OST badges on their clothing, forbidden from using public transportation, paid 3 to 4 times less than Germans, and forced to work 12 to 16 hours every day. Women like Oksana faced their own layer of hell: systematic sexual violence, forced use as reproductive tools, then robbed of their children. An estimated 500,000 children were born from forced relations between Ostarbeiter and Germans. Most of their fates remain unrecorded. After the war, survivors like Oksana were not welcomed as heroes. Stalin suspected them of collaborating with the enemy. Many were sent directly from Nazi labor camps to Soviet gulags. Why does this story matter today? Because it reminds us that the dehumanization of people doesn't begin with gas chambers. It begins with language, with calling others material, livestock, threats. It begins when we stop seeing the human in another person's eyes. Oksana says, "As long as I remember, I have not lost." This is a call to all of us. Remember, bear witness. Never let this history repeat itself.